Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the Mystic ball python, and the Mystic has been around probably for about 10 years. There's been quite a few combos that have been made with the Mystic, but I would say it's pretty much not really a mainstream ball python. As a matter of fact, when I was looking into the Mystic, it actually tricked me. Believe it or not, the Mystic is in the blue-eyed leucistic complex, and at first glance it didn't really seem like it was in the BEL, the blue-eyed leucistic complex. So what we're talking about is an all-white snake with blue eyes. And believe it or not, Bobby here, the bamboo ball python around my neck, he is in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. So if you bred a bamboo to a bamboo and you got a super bamboo, it would be an all-white snake with blue eyes. And the funny thing is, anything in the blue-eyed leucistic complex is allelic. So if you breed that super bamboo to something else, you'll get all bamboos. Or if you breed a bamboo to a lesser, which is also in the blue-eyed leucistic complex, you get a bamboo lesser. It's an all-white snake with blue eyes. And if you breed it to anything else, half the babies come out lesser, half the babies come out bamboo. It's a pretty interesting combination. And if you breed anything in the blue-eyed leucistic together, I used to have this blanket statement that I was saying, you know, I used to say this all the time, anything in the blue-eyed leucistic, if you breed them together and get the two genes, either the super or the two that act like a super, you get an all-white snake with blue eyes. And then came along the Mystic and kind of blew my whole theory out of the water. As a matter of fact, when I first started looking at Mystic, I looked at the super Mystic, and you would think anything in the BEL complex that's a super would be an all-white snake. And at first glance, it's not actually an all-white snake. And then I started looking around, looking at the Mystic crossed with the Mojave, and that's not an all-white snake either. And the Mojave is in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. So I looked at those two and I thought, all right, since it's not making white snakes with itself as a super or with the Mojave, I assumed it wasn't in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. Come to find out, you make a Mystic bamboo, you guessed it, it is a white snake, and you breed it with some of these other complexes in the blue-eyed leucistic, and as a matter of fact, it makes quite a few white snakes, so it's kind of an exception to the rule. It's in the BEL complex, but it doesn't really make a blue-eyed leucistic with all the morphs that are in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. It is really, I'd say it's kind of an exception to the rule. I've never really seen any gene like it. And you always make these blanket statements, and then along comes one of these morphs that just kind of blows everything you're saying out of the water. It's pretty interesting. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you some of the potential and some of the interesting characteristics of the Mystic gene. Alright, so I am over here at the World of Ball Pythons, and this is kind of usually where I hang out to look at all the different morphs. It has some really good pictures of the morphs and the combos. You can really get some really good, insightful info over here on the World of Ball Pythons. And I usually go back and forth between the World of Ball Pythons and Morph Market. And I actually had a comment that said, hey, one of those snakes you showed on Morph Market was actually ID'd incorrectly. So you have to really be careful, because on Morph Market, anyone can post any snake and they can actually make a mistake when it comes to identification. So I kind of trust the World of Ball Pythons a little bit more, and that is where I'm going to start. This is what just a regular base morph of a Mystic looks like, and I would say at first glance it kind of looks like, I would say, kind of like a normal as far as the pattern, but the thing that really strikes me is that it has a really intense difference, a high contrast between the black and the yellow right on top of the snake. And it seems like a lot of the Mystics really bring out the contrast and the brightness of a lot of combos, which is kind of interesting. And most people would say that the Mystic actually looks more like the Mojave than anything else. And I actually brought up a Mojave over here. This is what the Mojave looks like, and essentially the pattern on both is really reduced to from like alien heads to down to these keyhole patterns. It almost looks the same, I would say, except for the high contrast on the back of the snake. It's a little bit more high contrast on the Mystic compared to the Mojave. So the thing that really threw me off when I first started looking at the Mystic is you look at this snake, this is the Super Mystic, and at first it doesn't seem like it's in the blue-eyed leucistic complex, because you would think everything in the BL complex is actually a white snake with blue eyes. And let me tell you, this is not, doesn't look like it's in the complex to me, the Super Mystic, which is kind of interesting. And the other thing is, the other interesting thing is a lot of people say that the Mystic looks the same and acts the same as the Phantom, and a lot of people are saying it's actually the same gene, similar to the lesser and the butter, or the banana and the coral glow. There's a lot of examples where a lot of times people will find the same morph, name it different names, and then later on down the road they realize it's actually the same snake, the same morph. In this case, this is actually the Mystic Phantom, looks almost exactly the same as the Super Mystic. And if you actually look at the Super Phantom over here pretty much looks the same as the Super Mystic or the Mystic Phantom. So I'd say, based on what I'm seeing here, it looks like these are pretty much interchangeable, that you can actually interchange the Phantom and the Mystic. So this is also really interesting. This is the Mojave Mystic, and the Mojave is also in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. The funny thing is you look at the Super Mystic, and then you look at the Mystic Mojave, and if those are the first two you looked at, you're thinking, all right, this is not in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. But the interesting thing is these are really the two examples compared to everything else. And the funny thing is if you look at the genetics of the Mojave Mystic, I actually plugged it into the genetic wizard over here on the World of Ball Pythons. You breed a Mojave Mystic to a normal, and you can tell it is actually an allelic combination. You get half Mystic and half Mojave, which is, it pretty much acts like a super. If you're not familiar with the genetics, if you have two genes and you breed it to something, normally you don't get a 50-50 mix of each gene. And I actually pulled up an example of something that's not allelic, which is a pastel bamboo. If you actually bred a pastel bamboo to a normal, this is what you would normally expect. You would expect 25% normals, 25% pastel, 25% bamboos, 25% pastel bamboo. So you can actually reproduce the parent when you're breeding the pastel bamboo. If it's allelic, you really can't reproduce the parents. So this is also interesting. This is the Mystic Crystal. This is the Mystic and the Special, which is kind of interesting because the Special is kind of a little bit different. And if you look at the genetics of this one, this is actually another allelic combination. It's interesting that the Mystic actually produces quite a few allelic combinations with a lot of different genes. I thought that was pretty interesting. If you take a look at this, this is where it kind of enters into the blue-eyed leucistic complex. Here is the Mystic Bamboo, and you know the bamboo is actually in the blue-eyed leucistic complex, forms an all-white snake with blue eyes. And of course, if we look at the genetics over here, it's allelic. Actually, if you bred it to anything else, half the babies would be Mystic, half the babies would be bamboo. Here's another one, Mystic Lesser, and it keeps going on into the blue-eyed leucistic complex. If we look at the genetics of this one, this is also allelic. It's an all-white snake with blue eyes. And here is another one, the Butter Mystic. The Butter is essentially the same name as the Lesser, which is interesting. Here's another one, the Russo Mystic. So you can see the Russo is actually called het leucistic a lot of times. This is like one of the first blue-eyed leucistics that was actually made, and it looks like everything except Mojave and the Super Mystic is actually an all-white snake with blue eyes. It's kind of interesting how it's actually working. So I kind of wanted to show you some of the potential of the Mystic, mixing it in with other kind of the standard genes, like the bread and butter of kind of the base genes that a lot of breeders work with, breeding ball pythons. This is just a straight pastel, and look what happens when you mix the Mystic with the pastel. You get a crazy looking snake. I didn't even expect that it would actually interact with the pastel like this. It really kind of breaks it up and reduces the pattern, kind of washes out the very bottom of the sides. It is a really interesting snake. That is pretty dramatic. And of course, if you look at the pastel and the impact of the pastel, the next thing you want to do is add fire on top of it. So if you have fire and pastel, that is actually the firefly. And the firefly is probably one of the brightest yellow snakes with a really high contrast. And look what happens when you add mystic on top of the firefly. You get a pretty crazy snake. The head kind of washes out. You kind of get these highlights down the back, down the middle. It almost looks like a super pastel fire to me. It almost looks like a super fly, which is kind of interesting how it works like a super pastel in that case. So this is pretty dramatic too. This is just a straight cinnamon, and I would say if someone handed me a cinnamon, I'd be hard pressed to tell the difference between that and a normal. As a matter of fact, I have some normals that look almost exactly like this particular cinnamon. Look what happens when you mix mystic and cinnamon. That is a really crazy snake. I really like how it interacts with the cinnamon. It just makes kind of this line on the top and the sides. It just makes this jagged, kind of a wild looking, and then it almost looks like a tri-stripe up in the front of the snake. It is really quite interesting. It's interesting how they work together. Here's the banana, and of course the banana is, I would say it's when you mix banana with other things, you kind of get a faded out banana in a lot of cases. There's not a lot of genes that actually can trump the banana and actually have a really dramatic effect. And the mystic actually has quite a big effect on the banana. Take a look at this. This is the banana mystic. It's really, it kind of browns it out and it makes a really high contrast. It's a really interesting mix between the mystic and the banana. I really like this combination. If you're into the kind of the dark genes with a high contrast, I would say this would be a great beginning to start layering more genes on top. So this is interesting. This is the GHI, and it's interesting how you mix the mystic with the GHI, and it almost acts like, take a look at this. This is the GHI mystic, and if you've seen this before, you probably recognize this. This almost looks like a Mojave GHI. It's almost acting like a Mojave when you mix it with the GHI. I thought that was kind of a unique characteristic of the mystic. This is kind of interesting too. It seems like it works really well with the Yellowbelly, and the Yellowbelly as a standalone morph, I'd say it's another one of those that for me it's almost hard to identify just the straight Yellowbelly. In a lot of cases on a Yellowbelly, the belly isn't always yellow, and sometimes you can see like these little flames coming up the sides and just small differences that you really have to pick out to differentiate the Yellowbelly from a normal. But usually the Yellowbelly works well with a lot of genes, and look what happens when you mix the mystic with the Yellowbelly. You get a really dramatic impact between the mystic and the Yellowbelly. I really like how this works together, and this would be a great start to adding more layers on top of this to see really what you could do with the mystic and Yellowbelly. So I'm over here on Morph Market, and I just kind of was kicking around over here and I wondered how many mystics were actually on Morph Market. And you can see the total number of snakes that are for sale right now with mystic. It's only 176, which is not a whole lot of snakes. And then I went over to this page. This is essentially the total number of mystics that have been for sale and that have sold on Morph Market. And take a look at this. This is only 1,716 snakes over here on Morph Market. So I'd say it's probably about 1% of the total snakes that have ever been over here. Not a whole lot of people are working with mystic, but I would say it has some really good potential. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Tariq Marie Salih asks, is there anything you can breed with a spider to totally eliminate the head wobble? And as a matter of fact, there is. You can actually breed a blackhead to a spider, and you end up with a blackhead spider that has 0 chance of a head wobble. It's kind of interesting, but the problem is you end up with a snake that really doesn't look like a spider anymore. It pretty much looks like a blackhead. It wipes out all the pattern of the spider. So even though there's spider in there, you kind of defeat the purpose of the problem with the head wobble, because you end up with a snake that really doesn't look like a spider. And if you breed it with champagne, I'm not sure if it actually works with champagne. I just know that it works with the spider ball python. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.